I do like live in Venezuelan exile community, and a lot of them do support Trump invading Venezuela. Miami serves as the heart of Latin American counter-revolution. I think Marco Rubio and the neo-conservative ideology is not even just specifically limited to Latin American left governments. It's the entire region. And when Marco Rubio did his CARICOM trip, he was exactly using it to pressure these states to shift ties away from China. The ways in which this administration has named these certain groups as like foreign terrorist organizations, particularly Viva Ensemble in Haiti, as well as the groups he's listed in Venezuela, it seems like it's becoming a pretense to just bomb people in boats. They're serious about keeping the immigrants out, and how they're going to do it is not just a simple quote unquote interdiction. It looks like it's going to be through, striking them.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kim, for talking to me. You are a doctor, right?
Yes,
Yes. Okay.
sociologist.
I mean, if I had a heart attack, I wouldn't want to go to you. But with that said, what would I go to you for? You are an environmental sociologist who specializes in ecotourism, and I recently saw you post about it as well, in the context of the Hurricane Melissa in Jamaica. So, with that as sort of a recent phenomenon, can you talk about your background, and what kind of work you especially do in the field of ecotourism?
Yeah, so I look specifically at climate vulnerability in the Eastern Caribbean, so the Lesser Antilles. My dissertation was on Dominica, which is, people confuse it with the Dominican Republic. It's not the same country, but it's actually in between Martinique and Guadeloupe. And after Hurricane Maria in 2017, their, landscape was largely destroyed. And I was looking at how they sought to become the first climate resilient country in the world. That was their pledge. And I looked specifically at the ways in which the indigenous Kalinago community there seeks to incorporate their own forms of resilience and indigenous autonomy within the government's or the state's larger framework around eco sovereignty. So that's basically what I look at. And seeing the destruction of Hurricane Melissa, as a Category 5 storm and building up in the Caribbean Sea with these warmer waters, it kind of just speaks to the climate catastrophe of our time, and how small island developing states are trying to basically navigate a system where they contribute probably the least to global greenhouse gases, yet they face the brunt of the climate catastrophe. So I also look at those intersections.
It's kind of like a an interesting juxtaposition where, on the one hand, this predatory aspect of Westerners going to kind of the societies they exploit for leisure, and at the same time, this also serves as the lifeblood of the community. So how do you square the two, even in your research, especially, and in reality, how do the societies, how do the islands, whether it's the Caribbean, whether it's a sort of South American country that is on the coast, how do they square the dichotomy of this?
Well, interestingly enough, the Caribbean is the most tourism dependent region in the world, and tourism as an industry actually contributes to climate change. So it's an interesting dynamic of why I want to look at ecotourism specifically, the ways in which ecotourism can maybe have a more complementary relationship to the environment, even though a lot of my research found, especially in situations like Antigua and Barbuda, you see this kind of corporatized model of ecotourism that can also be very much aligned with corporate, capitalist greenwashing interests that also seek to strip autonomy from the land or from the people. For instance, with Barbuda, they had a communal land tenure that after Hurricane Irma, that would actually strike 2 weeks before Hurricane Maria, ended up displacing many of the Barbudan residents and the Antigua neighbor, because it's a same country but two different nation states. It's kind of confusing. But Antigua ended up pushing this kind of ecotourism model onto Barbuda, and they don't they don't have a tourism dependent economy like Antigua did. So I was seeing the ways as well that even within the context of post disaster, ecotourism can kind of sweep in with the same kind of predatory model, similar to New Orleans, after Hurricane Katrina, the ways in which tourism was really much pushed through speculative, real estate markets, of course, displacing, the poor residents. And so this is kind of systems and processes that occur in the global north as well as the Caribbean. And, just me being a South Florida native, I'm very much used to tourism and its intersection with hurricanes and how that affects the kind of post-disaster landscape. So I think that's what got me interested in this. But specifically looking, that's an excellent point. The pandemic caused a lot of these Caribbean economies to plummet, like almost overnight, because they lost that revenue. So ecotourism, especially with Dominica's case, they wanted to have a safe and nature option so that residents, would be able to still visit the island even within the pandemic. So, it just shows you that, you still kind of have to kind of play by this, frameworks of development that end up a lot of times are based off precarious kind of models, whether because it is vulnerable very much to like a global pandemic or natural disasters. So yeah, it's definitely something I look at.
Can you get a little deeper into how you got into it, why this is important to you?
Yeah, well, I think just I was really actually interested in looking at destination marketing, particularly of the Caribbean as like a site of desire, mythologized notions of paradise, and how that in the tropical landscape and how that ends up kind of erasing the humanity of the region and it becomes just a place. So for me being in South Floridian, I also see similar kind of discourses around how Miami is discussed in the popular imagination as just kind of a destination, a tourist destination. And I saw this during the pandemic because Florida had hardly any restrictions. So a lot of people, spring breakers, would come during the height of the pandemic and it was absolute chaos. So I think looking at it from that perspective, I very much, because I'm not Caribbean, I'm African American, but I very much kind of relate to that feeling of being in a tourism dependent economy, having, locals be kind of the background and just having your entire kind of city landscape centered around outsiders and, feeding this idea of like a foreign gaze, if you will. So that's just something that I think resonated with me and why I look to, make those connections.
This is kind of interesting, where on the one hand, there is the view of the Caribbean and like Latin America, especially as a tourist destination. But on the other hand, like there is an entire US Defense Department installation. There is an increase in the buildup that is being compared to Vietnam levels and like the Cuban Missile Crisis levels, and so on. So first of all, like how does that I mean, first and foremost, the juxtaposition of tourist destination where you're supposed to go and chill and have cocktails and the beach on at the same time you have like the largest aircraft carriers just parked down the road.
Right. I mean, and that's another, I think this ties well into how the US treats its colony of Puerto Rico. The ways in which, Puerto Rico, whose main economy is not in tourism, it's in manufacturing, but the ways in which a lot of people would see it just as a tourist destination. I hear this a lot of times from my Puerto Rican comrades, and they would say that, they're being used as basically a military base now to launch these operations within the wider Caribbean. So I think that's just another perfect example of this kind of juxtaposition of like wanting this, seeing the region as a place of leisure. And even we know Venezuela's far right opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, was just saying that like, oh, she can't wait to develop the coastal line of Venezuela. It needs tourism, like it needs more tourist development. So just the ways, again, you're seeing this kind of interaction between militarism and tourism. And I always bring it back to Grenada in with the invasion, but looking at the earlier State Department memos from 1979, they explicitly mention how Maurice Bishop and his revolutionary jewel movement was a threat and scared off tourists. So that was
Hmm.
actually in the State Department memos in 1979. This is before Reagan, saying that he scared off tourists, and that was seen as a major threat. And Maurice Bishop wanted a more redistributive model of tourism where the profits actually stay in the host nation. Because that's one thing, if you study Caribbean tourism, it's that there's high leakage a lot of times. So that revenue is not staying in the country. And he just wanted a model where Grenada could actually get the profits from what they were providing, which is their beauty, their natural beauty. So it just shows, again, the ways in which tourism is not neutral. It's a part of an extractive, it can be a part of an extractive neoliberal development model that is also tied up with US imperialism. So, yes. I don't really talk specifically about that in my dissertation, but I want to explore that maybe in an updated chapter.
So, what is your dissertation specifically about?
It looks specifically at how the Commonwealth of Dominica seeks to become the world's first climate resilient country. And I did ethnography in 3 years, specifically in the Kalinago territory, which is the Caribbean's only indigenous recognized island settlement. And I basically spent time with the Kalinago cultural producers that are basically using ecotourism as a framework of like cultural sovereignty. But within that lens, you're still seeing the ways in which indigenous identity and performance is negotiated amongst tourist stakeholders. And I look and I question whether or not, like, what is authentic indigenous identity and expression, and how does that shape within larger kind of neoliberal processes of development and autonomy. Then I zoom out to look at the Dominican nation state that has, citizenship by investment, which is controversial. I look at the geopolitical forces that impact the ways in which these small island Eastern Caribbean states had their banana exporting economies plummeted thanks to Bill Clinton trying to, in 1999, yeah, I believe, with the World Trade Organization ruling that devastated their economies to favor US multinationals. I looked at all those different factors and say, what is the paradox of post-coloniality in the Caribbean context, the Anglophone Caribbean context? So, yeah, good stuff. FIU should publish it soon.
I see you online post about what's happening in Venezuela, both the military escal. I mean, like even yesterday, I think there was a post about a strike that was conducted, and on like right-wing media and all of that, this is being they're really buying this bullshit that like it's a these are like drug boats and so on. And for some reason, these drug boats are in operation in only the year 2025, and we haven't seen any of this prior to this year. So given your research, both looking into the history of the region as well as what's going on now, um, what do you make of this decision to when they choose to invade? What is the reason for when they choose to escalate in the region? Why now, as opposed to not like 5 years ago, not 2 years ago?
Well, I think one thing when it comes to the Bolivarian project in Venezuela is it's been a bipartisan attack since, I mean, for the over what, 25 years at this point, because we can remember since, 2002 2002, yeah, when George W. Bush attempted a coup. We can go to I know from the Obama administration was when I first started getting like militant and radical, and I would be protesting Obama supporting a coup attempt in 2014, and supporting far-right Leopoldo Lopez. And then that's when you actually started to see the economic kind of factors play with the sanctions in particular. It didn't just begin with Trump; it accelerated under Trump. Then of course the bounty and Biden keeping that bounty on, even doubling it, I believe, right before he left office, doubled the bounty on Maduro's, head or whatever. And then now this most intense escalation. And obviously before this, it was, I think, 2019 with Juan Guaido. And I mean, I just feel, and I know the reason is because Venezuela, under the Bolivarian Project, really is a sovereign, radical project to assert, and this is important, pan-Caribbean solidarity and autonomy. Like that's the key thing. And I think looking at my own research, I bring this up. My dissertation with Petrocaribe, that was so significant. When Venezuela was offering discounted oil to a lot of these small islands, including Dominica, that it allowed a framework of development and infrastructural loans or infrastructural development outside the IMF dictates, outside of US policy prescriptive kind of forms of economic, constrained post-disaster financing loans. And, after, I believe it was Tropical Storm Erica, they Chavez ended up giving, like a lot of like loans for Dominica, and they invested those loans in specifically housing. So that was just a way for them to, and like I said before, the other alternative is IMF. So what I say about the significance of, and that's why CARICOM, despite being neo-colonial, wanted the US to take the sanctions off of Venezuela because that was hurting them. That was hurting the entire Caribbean region and their, efforts to, just develop, autonomously and, to keep it a sovereign kind of zone of peace, which has now been weaponized, sadly. But just thinking about in terms of what the Bolivarian Project represented abroad is very important, but also just internally, having like there's so many Afro-Venezuelans I learned that felt like they had a voice for once in Venezuelan society, Venezuelan politics. The ways in which even in indigenous people were given explicit rights in the Constitution, and that is a threat to the class and race and colorist kind of systems in place in Latin America. And I feel like that's something that with that you see with the racist caricatures against Chavez and Maduro, painting him as an ape or as a mule, and these kind of like animalizing caricatures that are rooted very much in anti-African, anti-Black, anti-Indigenous kind of tropes. And so I was looking to see specifically about like why the far right agenda has just been so aggressive regarding Venezuela. And just like I said, just even keeping 50%, right, of their oil revenue state owned is considered too much, right? And that's why you're seeing people like Machado keep saying, no, we're going to push this free market ideology, and that's going to save everything. Just also the larger geopolitical alignments. As we know, in 2009, Chavez broke ties with Israel. And this will get into why, the Nobel Peace Prize awarded who they did, but it speaks to, again, the larger geopolitical alignments that challenge the US-led world order. And I feel like Venezuela does that. So.
It's interesting that you bring up both the Peace Prize as well as the alignments in geopolitics because both in right-wing media as well as in general there is this connection that they're making between Venezuela and Iran. And as you know, Iran was under attack by Israel. And so it's kind of interesting that like there is an escalation of conflict in Venezuela for no reason. It seems like with this pretense of drug busting, especially, which has no context whatsoever. It's not born in fact. And of course, like nothing that has never like stopped the US from, acting, like taking military action, striking before. But the brazenness and kind of out of blue aspect of it, especially given, and I think like, of course, like it is expected given the who's Secretary of State and what constituency he represents, and that's something that you can
Oh
definitely
yeah.
speak to. How much the local politics of Florida impacts the outsized influence that this foreign policy has. Why is this such a priority for them, especially if they already have their guy in office?
And that's a great question. And, I've been trying to understand because, I do like live in Venezuelan exile community. And, I have been talking to my neighbors. I'm trying to get, just see where they're at. And a lot of them do support Trump invading Venezuela. Like they do. And it's really shocking to think that you guys saw what happened in Iraq, like to think that US intervention would be the answer. But what I've learned from living in Miami since 2018, and there are some coup attempts happening in 2018, 2019, whether it was, Nicaragua, 2019, of course, with Venezuela again. I did learn that there is, I would say, Miami serves as the heart of Latin American counter-revolution. So
Mm.
that to me is how I can understand historically, what Miami served, the networks it serves. It's a very anti-communist climate, and finding out as soon as Marco Rubio was chosen as Secretary of State, I knew that the Latin America policy was going to be incredibly aggressive, and that's what it's been. Some were surmising that Trump would be kind of hands off, particularly with Haiti. And Haiti is like the center point of a lot of my anti-imperialist activism. And Trump has been extremely aggressive on Haiti and extremely interventionist in Haiti, especially with Eric Prince and the paramilitaries, Blackwater, and the drones, and expanding with the gang suppression force. So I think Marco Rubio and the neoconservative ideology is not even just specifically limited to Latin American left governments. It's the entire region. And when Marco Rubio did his CARICOM trip, he was exactly using it to pressure these states to take tie or shift ties away from China, as well as in the Cuba medical brigade relations that they have with Cuba. Oh, yeah, with Cuba. So again, this is their posture. It's incredibly aggressive, and I was naive myself to think that he would be. I really did think he was going to be like hands off Haiti. I really was. Like I thought he was, and I was wrong. But Biden has always also been, Democrats in particular, have been very interventionist with Haiti as well. So that's what I mean by that bipartisanship. But at this level of overt kind of Reaganite, Cold War style militarist aggression I'm seeing in the Caribbean, that does feel like an extreme escalation.
Like it's also fascinating to juxtapose that with like the level of anti-immigrant posturing that they have and how isolationist that they were initially with America First. Like it was completely like no more immigration, certainly not from not of any brown people. And like certainly no more wars was another policy that they were saying, but now for some reason it has come to like America First means Monroe Doctrine, hemispherical domination, and so every action that is taken in that direction is supposed to be a positive for at least the Republicans, and they are the ones in power. So the question now is like, how is that helpful for their immigration agenda if they're like going to invade countries and overturn leaders, and they're going to cause immense exodus, like refugee crises in these places, and it looks like they're not just going to stop with Venezuela. So Venezuela is just like the first country that they're also trying to, there's already been an attack of somebody who's Trinidadian in amid like caught in the crossfire. And I believe an Ecuadorian also got hit. I'm not sure. I'll have to check. But if they're going to keep escalating attacks on other countries as well, like how does that fit with the no more immigrants immigration agenda?
Well, I think that's what's been particularly alarming, because the ways in which this administration has named these certain groups as like foreign terrorist organizations, particularly Viva Ensemble in Haiti, as well as the groups he's listed in Venezuela, it seems like it's becoming a pretense to just bomb people in boats, which could simply also be asylum seekers. That could also be, just migrants, just struggling. Just it could be anyone, and that's what I think is so frightening about this, because it could just be, it's not even that, like, the pretext of terror is just becoming an excuse to extrajudicially assassinate people. And like, I just, from an immigration lens, they're serious about keeping the immigrants out, and how they're going to do it is not just a simple quote unquote interdiction. It looks like it's going to be through you know striking them, and that's what so that's a more like sinister reading of it. But it's also the ways in which, because keeping, I saw this as well with, again, I go back to Haiti all the time, because I see the ways in which, as soon as the US supported the gang suppression force, got that through the UN Security Council without any objections. They got that through the Security Council, and then immediately, I believe they put like tariffs on all the manufacturing hub, which is a major source of like employment, which is of course very exploitative in Haiti. But it just shows that that's going to cause people to lose their jobs overnight. So now you have a situation where people don't even have any income, and now you're sending militarization. So it just kind of feeds the same cycle of punishing poor people, and they know that they're basically creating conditions that would drive more migration through their imperialist destabilized policies, and they don't care. Like, and I just wonder what the end goal is, what the end game is they have. But yeah, that's it definitely seems like a strategy of hypocrisy. The same thing I know you mentioned Marjorie Taylor Greene is another one. Like I said, this kind of paleocon, anti-foreign aid with Israel and Ukraine, but then when it comes to the Caribbean, again, and Latin America, it's we can go in. And I think this kind
Hmm.
of speaks to this mindset of this hemisphere is our backyard. And I think that mindset, that kind of colonial mindset, is what drives a lot of these policies. And
Here, I think it becomes important to highlight the the socialist policies of the countries that are being targeted because that's a significant reason as to why Venezuela, especially with its nationalized oil, um, is being targeted as opposed to other countries that might be. And that's what's so fascinating because like he's even saying that he's willing to play ball, but still, it would be more preferable for them to install somebody else who would be who would have a more capitalist system, would not have a nationalized industry. Um, is this simply just like an epistemic sort of violence? Like they just don't want the ideology itself or like the system of government itself to thrive, or is it more so a a strategic thing, um, or is it a combination of both?
yeah, I see it as, Washington wanting to assert its grip on, Caribbean fiscal policy, neoliberal austerity measures that they know kind of like strangle, these economies, but it fits whether, with again, Washington's consensus, if you will. Like we see, I think with Argentina as a perfect example. I made a point about how, libertarianism in the global South isn't self-sustaining and it needs to be bailed out by the
Hmm.
imperialist powers. So, with that $40 billion, I guess loan, if you will, toward Milei, I think you pronounce his name, in
Yeah.
Argentina, that speaks to kind of you're rewarded when adopt this kind of libertarian posture. And when you're Cuba, Venezuela, you're sanctioned, and you're punished. And then they blame socialism for that. So it just feels like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Again, they want to punish anyone who seeks an independent path, and that explains the attacks on Iran too. It's not even just strictly just quote unquote socialist. It's really just anyone who seeks an independent path from the Washington dictates. I feel like they don't want that, and they are going to crush you to kind of further you within their alignment. I mean, you see with Syria. I mean, now I think they released the sanctions finally on Syria. I'm not sure, but it just shows you what Syria had to maybe give up to get the sanctions lifted, and which was basically giving up its, I guess, solidarity with the Palestinian cause. I mean, you could argue because that was part of I guess, the demands, if you will.
And you have to have Al Qaeda be your leader if you want to have sanctions lifted. But yeah, no, given the situation as an academic and as an activist, what do you think is the role of somebody who's working in the field, as well as somebody who's just like an average person being online, that could go against this clear counter revolution that you think is headquartered in Miami?
I will say, as someone who, like, just seeing the protest culture of South Florida from when I would first, I think in 2013, this is not directly related to, foreign policy, but it was Trayvon Martin, the acquittal of George Zimmerman, that was 2013. And that was when I first like moved back here when I graduated from college. And seeing that protest from where we are now, that's completely different. It's a far more repressive climate with the protest laws that Florida passed after 2020, with the motorists can run you over kind of thing. And I've seen, even with the US out of Venezuela network down here from 2019, when I was out protesting almost every week, to now, it's almost non-existent. And I'm trying to build that up again, like I know this is the week of action in defense of Venezuela's solidarity and sovereignty. So I'm organizing a screening regarding the canal movement in Haiti to try to draw these parallels with Haiti and Venezuela. And that's going to be Thursday. But in terms of like mobilizations, yeah, I mean, we were just out protesting the Puerto Rican governor because she supports, the island being basically a military launching pad against Venezuela. So what I would tell them is connect with the few, left groups that do exist, and they are building some some more ones, if you can. And yeah, just know that there's people out here in South Florida, even though it's really sprawled and diffuse. There's still people out here organizing to resist, this U.S. empire.
When we talk about Latin America and South America coups, they're always like conducted by these paramilitary forces that are um, effectively armed thugs, right? Like who double as mercenaries, who can be organized to overthrow militaries and regimes and stuff like that. So it's fascinating that there is a force like that that is also simultaneously being built up in the US in the form of ICE, um, which is interesting to me that like the US is also kind of emulating the same model that it kind of used to export. So it's fascinating that at the same time that it is like a figure like Maria Corina Machado is being recognized internationally, the US is also adopting this model of like normalizing effectively fascist thugs who act with impunity because the state backs them.
And I think it kind of also speaks to the ways in which these paramilitary forces, whether or not, the ones who want to institute this coup in Venezuela and, the class interests they represent, also the elites like Corina Machado, a white Venezuelan, right? Someone who has, like you said, built these fascist alliances, whether it's with Spain, Spain's like fascist parties, whether it's with the Likud in Israel. Again, that just speaks to this kind of global network of the far right. And that's what kind of, I think, exposes the underbelly of Western liberalism when you see, again, institutions like the Nobel Prize award someone like this woman and say that she represents Western values of democracy. Because, again, within their framework around this Atlanticist, NATO-aligned security apparatus, this is those are their values, and it doesn't have to anything to do with peace. What it does have to do with is, again, um, reinforcing this US-led imperial social order across the world. And it's interesting that, right after her winning her Peace Prize award, she praises Israel in their genocidal onslaught on Gaza. So it just shows you that the principles outlined in there, I mean, it just exposes, like I said, the complete hypocrisy of the Western liberal institutions, and their democracy projects are anything but.
Previously there used to be this veneer of like we're doing this to instill democracy, we're gonna bring democracy to them and stuff like that, but they're saying that right now, and it's evident even to the people on their side, like a lot of right-wing media itself is like kind of reflecting this skepticism. It's like, nah, I don't think that's what this is about. This is about the oil. This lady is saying literally, come take my oil, and that's what this is about. And like yet they're able to nakedly do this sort of intervention. And at the same time, it's fascinating that like there is this repressive rule while decrying authoritarianism in these countries and so on, to have like a state persecution system both against protest in the US, but also having like these kind of ICE bounty hunters be like masked agents who can just effectively disappear people without any sort of question. What kind of opposition do you see, like anybody in any institution of power posing to this? I know I saw a couple of senators go and visit a guy that they deported in a facility or something like that. But beyond that, like beyond these kind of symbolic thoughts and prayers, what else are we getting? Is there any kind of institutional opposition to this?
Well, interestingly enough, I that's another thing I had followed from Trump's first administration to now, which is that it seemed I'd hear, oh, well, the country's just more right wing on this issue regarding immigration. So like how in Miami there's just been complete, folding with ICE when they said they wouldn't prior. So I'm seeing this like capitulate. And well, one of that is because in Florida, DeSantis threatened to that they had, like you said, that all the actual cities have to align with ICE. So he kind of made like that a mandate. But you're also seeing with Democrats as well. I've noticed like a softer posture. I mean, they don't even say abolish ICE anymore. I mean, you'd have maybe some progressives like Ilhan Omar, kind of pushing that, and she's the one that drafted the line saying that the U.S. should end its strikes in the Caribbean. So I am appreciative for some of the pushback that she's doing, Ilhan Omar, but they're trying to constantly, she's a target, just, by being a Somali woman. But it's nice to see that at least. And then, of course, you have some libertarians like Rand Paul, which I don't like to always uplift because, I'm trying not to uplift libertarians, but he's been the probably one of the few senators that are pushing back on the extrajudicial killings in the Caribbean Sea, and so that's one thing that I've been shocked at, that Trump can continue can bomb Iran and he could have supporters defend that, and try to strike now Venezuela and have his defender, have his MAGA base support that, and despite apparently the American public not supporting U.S. Bombing Venezuela. But it's like that doesn't really matter, and it's kind of unfortunate to see. I do think there needs to be more of a bringing in the domestic with the international, like you're saying, this kind of militarized police force about who belongs here and who doesn't. I think that very much shapes this kind of racialized narrative around who's a terrorist. And I was bringing that with how Venezuelan young men were being kind of racially profiled. And I believe that the judge said that you can racially profile. The Supreme Court said that you can racially profile, which is just wild to me. So it's kind of a bleak picture, but I'm trying to, like I said, I think one of the questions you would ask was like, how do we like build like a true like internationalist or anti-racist like coalition? And I think how we do that is seeing how these struggles are connected, the same way that Palestinian young men are kind of just labeled all one thing, they're all just terrorists, or how Venezuelan and Latino men are labeled all narco terrorists, right? It just becomes a pretext to clamp down on racialized and marginalized communities. And I think that if we see that our struggles are interconnected, that's a great way that we can build solidarity and fight back. And also, when thinking about policing in this country and the history, like of slave patrols, what does that mean in terms of for African Americans like myself? A lot of people think that, oh, we can align with the far right because these immigrants are taking our resources. But when you really, unpeel that, we are also racialized people and can be, mistaken for Haitian or Jamaican in any other context. So this idea that we don't need to build with other, Black immigrants or other communities is just a really dangerous, I think, method to quote unquote getting our liberation, or reparations, which is what they think that we can get if we, are xenophobic enough toward other groups. And I just see that, it's based off the idea of who's really an American, and African Americans have never been considered truly American. And I think that if we understand our history and that we can build with other oppressed communities, then that's how we can, like I said, really fight back this fascist machine.
Last question, if you will, like just to weave in the kind of positivism through the Mexico protest situation, which I think is worth discussing only because it was supposed to be this earth-shattering event and a sort of referendum on Claudia Sheinbaum, but actually it amounted to be a whole lot of nothing. Not only that, but also it definitely smacked of having this color revolution dimension. It seemed to be conducted a lot by especially explicitly right-wing forces who went after her as a Jewish person and so on. There was like this graffiti and all of that. So clearly, like again, mask off moment once again. But seems like the universally popular leader was able to hold on to power like nothing really. She wasn't taken out of power or anything like that. So besides like showing this resilience, how can you build on this like in terms of countries On the one hand, you spoke about people in the United States, but in terms of having an internationalist politics, a way to counter U.S. foreign policy through, Latin American and South American solidarity.
So, one thing that's why I'm really proud about being a member of Black Alliance for Peace because their Haiti Americas team in particular, we're directly connected with a lot of these like Caribbean organizations that have been fighting back against the kind of acquiescence by CARICOM or maybe silence around what the U.S. is doing in their own region, defying the principles of the zone of peace. We talked to the Movement of Social Justice in Trinidad and Tobago, which is a socialist party that specifically of trade unionists that has spoken out, has conducted multiple mobilizations against what their Prime Minister Kamala, she's very, very pro-Trump and very aggressive, is doing. And he's saying that we don't want war with Venezuela. We don't want to be used as, a pretext for targeting another Caribbean country, as well as, and they had support, I believe, from 9 other Caribbean states. So I think for me, and one thing I'm realizing when I'm reflecting on like the UN Security Council resolution for Gaza yesterday, I was realizing I was like, we can't put our faith in any kind of neo-colonial bloc, whether it's CARICOM and how they betray Haiti, whether it's the Arab League or I think it's called the IOC or the OIC, and whether how they betray Palestine. Because these are essentially neo-colonial institutions, and they are going to be pressured by Washington, and they have their own interests. Rather than if the people rise up and the people, through organization, say like we are building power outside of this, so that they have to answer to us, and we don't support what Washington is doing. We don't support having Trump install a government in Gaza, and then you see less, in my opinion, acquiescence. I look at that more than just this like multipolar world in the abstract. I think that that's what we really want to build, which is people-powered led movements that can pressure and put, like I said, and make these governments answer to us and not just begging them, So that's how I see it.